I got you. All right. Well, I'm back, guys. Hey, it's so glad to be back. DJ Ryan is back. Yeah, sorry, Kevin. Do you really want me to be a part of this?
Huh?
Say it again.
It's better than DJ
What,
CJ.
have you already started it?
Man, we're live, bro.
Oh, we are?
Let's
Cool.
go. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I mean. no,
Showtime.
We're good. Well, what's been going on? We've got Ryan's back with us today.
Yeah. Do you really want me back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You and your craziness and your ADD.
Yeah.
Fun to have around.
Yeah. I bring a little life, don't I?
Yep. You bring life for sure.
I couldn't tell if that was sarcasm or what.
No, I mean it's true. Maybe a tiny bit, but
I got you.
It's true. You bring both life and death. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wow.
I'm just.
I don't know how to.
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah,
but,
me either.
Yeah. So, what's been going on with you?
Just being dad and vacation, family, and taking care of my grandma. Yeah, I was saying earlier, it's just life, man. Life is happening.
Yeah. Life is. I don't know what it is about being 30 plus, but something about 30 plus, it seems like it just gets busier and busier.
The more I watch my kids, the more I want to go back to being a kid.
Yeah. You definitely. I've started having a much stronger appreciation for childhood for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I know. Have that energy back, but
oh yeah,
I think I still have the energy.
Yeah, Ryan's one of the lucky few that does. Like most of us don't retain it, but you do somehow. I think I'm sure the Lord blessed you with that since you're a pastor. He's like,
I guess
I need you to be full of energy,
or just drink 2 Alanis a day.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's the secret right there.
Speaking of today's sponsor.
No, don't. We do not have sponsors yet.
I just had a case shipped to my house. So.
Although, Alani, if you're hearing this,
yes,
we are happy to take your money.
Or free drinks. I'll take free drinks.
Either way would be cool. But
shoot.
Anyway,
what's been going on with you guys? I feel like I hadn't seen you guys, but only on Sundays. Because I'm not in your group anymore. You'll kick me out.
Well,
not true.
Well,
I know I quit.
We have standards to uphold.
Yeah.
Oh shoot.
Yeah. Look, if you don't come to work, you know what I mean. We just got to give you the axe. Nah, but stuff's been good with me. Just pretty normal. Nothing too crazy that I can think of.
Yeah.
Even
That's
though
good.
I know international matters or people at least feel like it's crazy right now. It's like we've said before, I think things will get better over time. We may have some occasional pain in the short term, but hopefully we'll see good long-term results.
Yes, the more media places that close, the better things will get.
Yeah, well, we're
fake news.
It's unfortunate that traditional media is becoming a much less trustworthy source. But thankfully, the economy other things tend to pop up, like, for instance, podcasts. And fortunately right now it's difficult for powerful folks to stop podcasts from saying what they want to say. So hopefully that'll continue to be the case, but
yeah. Or just more tariffs.
Yeah. Yeah. They always gotta tax something or place a new tax. I mean,
yes.
If we're taking away income tax, we're adding one to gas, or we're adding on to your property taxes or whatever.
Yeah.
I think Chris and I were talking about the other day. I don't remember if we spoke about it while we were recording, but I know I talked about how it'd be beneficial to go to a flat tax rate, and Chris did a little bit of research into it. And Chris, do you remember what year that was that you said that we were at like 15 or 17 or something like that %?
Yes, it was 1917 was the first really huge increase, and that was when we started World War One. Up until then, we hovered around, but between 3 and 7% tax rate across the board until 1917.
So
And
that included federal and everything.
that included federal and everything.
Can you imagine how much better off we'd be if we only had to pay 3 to 7%?
Oh man. Yeah.
There would be no reason that we couldn't all be our own little entrepreneur in some way.
And this was just a few years before, and I'm talking about in the big scheme of things, that was we were about 30 years removed from the Civil War. But shortly after the Civil War, for a period of about 10 years, there was no income tax period.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say I can't remember where I heard or read that, but I remember seeing something like that
The
They-
first income tax was to fund the Civil War.
yeah. Which is a shame.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to show you how that's, even though we're not having a civil war at home right now, we're always, it feels a lot of times like we're always getting into new conflicts overseas. Because although right now, I mean, don't get me wrong, we always have special forces and special operations in different places and some soldiers stationed in different areas, but to my knowledge right now we don't have any kind of the only major conflict that we have is just this trade deal with China. So hopefully that'll get better, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. Does anybody here utilize insurance for or let's say like a life insurance policy or an annuity or anything like that?
I mean, I have life insurance policies.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to talk some about insurance today. Do you guys know much about insurance?
They take my money and I don't need it.
Yeah, it's a pain.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have there in case.
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, that's
sometimes.
that's what they do their best to convince people of.
Yeah.
And part of where I'm getting at with that, if I were to ask you this question, let's see what you would say. So you were paying for any type of policy, you were paying an insurance company money for what exactly? What are you paying them for?
Health or home.
For the comfort of supposedly not having to pay out of pocket when something happens.
Mm-hmm. And does it ever really pan out that way? Let me ask you that.
Not completely.
Yeah.
So in other words, where I'm getting at with this is basically, in my opinion, most insurance you're paying for a product that really doesn't actually exist. Which I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear. But I'm not saying insurance.
Let's start an insurance company.
Yeah, hey, I was gonna get to that later too. I was gonna say,
Let's take innocent people's money.
yeah, before I was in the right place with God, and I was, studying how to make more money in finances and stocks. One of the first things I thought of once I got heavy into it was, man, insurance seems like a really good business because you're selling people nothing for money. Which sounds, terrible, of course, but
Yeah.
that's your mindset when you're not right with God, I guess, is basically as a businessman, if your moral compass isn't working like it should be, your only priority is going to be to take as much as you can from other people legally.
Yeah.
And hate to throw them out there, but insurance companies are unfortunately a big example of that. Let me pull up one. So one of the big insurance companies that I pulled up right now, it sits at $51.56 billion. And that's just
It's true.
one example. I know that at times, like I want to say one of the health insurance companies is worth like 500 billion. As a matter of fact, I think it's that company that the CEO got killed.
Mm.
I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head.
United Healthcare.
Yeah, United. Let's see what it's worth today. And we may have spoken about this one before, but yeah, so as of close today, it's worth 533.82 billion.
Wow.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not companies have to profit and make money, but insurance companies can be, and I mean plenty of other businesses can be too, but as of late they just feel more scummy than usual. And part of the reason I feel this way is because I myself recently had to deal with an insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So I would tell you, be very selective and very careful. Yeah, we have to, most people feel like we have to have home insurance or something like that in the event that something bad happens. But
Are we throwing insurance companies under the bus?
oh, absolutely. That's mainly what today is about. No.
So like State Farm?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I might as well throw them out there. If you're listening, and some of you may be in other countries and have different companies or different versions of insurance, but we have one called State Farm, and I spent at least a year just trying to get them to do what they're supposed to do, which is repair my roof after storm damage. And I had to go out of my way and hire a public adjuster and pay him a portion of the bill just to get them to do what they're supposed to do. So the unfortunate thing
here's the big question: are you still a client?
Not for much longer. Unfortunately, right now, yes, but it's because I have to figure out what my other options are and select what I feel like is going to be the best from those new options.
Hey Kevin, can you elaborate for the listeners as to why it took so long and why they were so slow moving?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be pretty blunt about it, and I think it's a pretty blunt answer. It's just like all businesses, they're not in the business of handing out money. So, being that they are a for-profit business, even though insurance companies advertise themselves as doing all these things to help you, ultimately they're hoping that you never have any issues so that they never have to pay you anything. But
I've seen those commercials. You should have just called and asked for Jake.
yeah, Jake from
Yeah, but you
State
can't get him.
You don't.
He's not available.
You don't get Jake. You get Snake. That's who you get.
Oh snap!
Yeah. So.
Hence the name of this podcast.
Yeah.
This episode.
Naming this one Snake Oil in honor of insurance companies because they're selling cure-alls that aren't really cure-alls.
Yeah.
But even though I'm giving them a hard time, ultimately they did meet their obligation and eventually pay, but that's only because, like I said, I hired help and we proceeded to chew them out in I don't even know how many emails, but luckily the guy I hired is pretty good at chewing people out.
When it all boils down to, insurance companies are in the business of selling security. That's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to sell you security. If we don't want these things to happen, but if they do, we'll be there to take care of you.
Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong. There are, I mean, I haven't worked with them yet, but from what I've heard, there are insurance companies out there that do a better job of meeting their obligations.
I mean, we all three of us, we have a mutual friend who goes to our church, and he actually said that State Farm is the hardest ones to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't want to use his name because I'd have to ask him, but yeah, he is the reason why I hired the public adjuster, that same guy, because he said that consistently they are one of the more challenging companies to deal with. And just to give you an idea, and I'm not picking on them exclusively, but the more you see a company advertise on big networks and whatnot, it's because they have an abundance of advertising dollars, which means that they are super, super profitable. And again, not that businesses have to profit, but the more that you see them advertise on a big stage, it probably means that they're getting over more on people than people are on them.
Well,
You
let's
know.
look at this from a monetary standpoint. I know that that's shady business to do it that way. However, if you're an insurance company and you have, let's just use a big number, if you have 1 million claims come in this week and you deny them all, you tell them, we're not going to pay these, and say 20% of those say, well, they're not going to pay for it, and then they never push back. Well, that's 20% of those claims that they didn't have to pay. So it's very much in their advantage to deny these claims.
Yeah, I mean, from a profit standpoint, it's basic math. I mean, the less that they have to pay out on claims, the more they get to keep. But I mean, the problem is, like I said, it's just we're such a world of deception now because I mean, you're telling people like, you're not to use everybody's slogans, but you're in good hands, like a good neighbor, all this stuff. But and like one of y'all said earlier, they're selling you security, but they're really just selling you something, hoping that you never have to actually collect.
It looks like your good neighbor wouldn't come to the door.
Yeah. Yeah, I never saw my good neighbor until, but they did ultimately come through. But like I said, it took far more trouble than it should have to get them to meet that obligation.
Yeah, once you had the new adjuster there, we're like, Kevin, was that you? We didn't know that was you.
Yeah. But anyway, I say all that to say too that any type of policy, or even if whether it be life insurance or some annuity product that you're hoping is going to pay you over a lifetime, I'm not saying that they're always bad, but like I said, these companies are out to make money. So any benefit that you get is not their main priority. And you have to be mindful and watch out for clauses and stuff like that in these contracts where they can potentially terminate the policy or change the payout. There's usually more fine print than you would like there to be about how they can keep from paying you. As a matter of fact, I think let me see which one of my mini computer windows I pulled up talking about these things.
And one of the things that's hard for people to understand, especially about sales, the insurance companies, lawyers, these type of things, it's very hard to be in those businesses and get to where you need to be, at least in some areas that I have been exposed to, without being shady. And that's why a lot of times when people come to the Lord, they either go into another segment of that business or they either go to another place where they don't have to do the things that they used to do. I heard a story about a lawyer. In fact, he's a guy that I listen to a lot. And he became a Christian, and he no longer was comfortable being an attorney and doing the things that he had to do. So he just became a title attorney because he could do that business without being shady, without having to do things that made him uncomfortable, things that made him, that would keep him from having a correct relationship with God.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely understand why you would sort of come to that conclusion. And a similar thing happened to me when I was doing car sales. And I'm not bashing those guys, but it just, you have to be comfortable in a fast-paced sales environment is it's a lot different than a lot of other career paths. You just have to be sometimes far more aggressive and less moral than you would like to be.
And the reason that is a lot of times, and I know you know this, Kevin, this is what you're saying, but when there are companies out there, when there are salesmen out there that are willing to do things that are shady, that are unchristian, they're going to put the good people out of business. So sometimes you have to take that into account, when you select the type of work you're in. An honest man is going to be way behind somebody who's willing to cut corners and to be shady.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's,
Say that again.
No, I just said there are professions out there that are geared toward people who are willing to cut corners and to be shady.
Yeah.
And an honest person, somebody who loves the Lord, if you go into those kind of businesses, it's hard for them to stay in business because there's somebody who's willing to undercut them. There's somebody who's willing to do shady things, and they will put good people out of business a lot of times because they're willing to do those things.
Yeah.
yeah, that's one thing that I want people to understand better over time is, yeah, there's plenty of ways to cut corners and make the quick dollar, but if the quick dollar requires you to sacrifice your soul, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, what have you gained?
Yeah. I what scripture is that? If you gain the whole world and lose your soul, anybody know? Let's see.
Matthew 16:25.
Matthew 16:25. Good. So, yep, that's a popular scripture. And
We were there not too long ago.
we spoke about that in our
Actually, 16:26.
talking about in the beat group.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, we have outside of church, we have what are called beat groups, which is, I guess, what most churches would call Bible study. We do our little,
Small groups.
yeah, small groups and Bible study. We do once or twice a week. It's good to get that extra Bible time in. But anyway, to continue on the topic of insurance companies, I typed into I tried to get Chat GPT to help me figure out sort of how annuities and some other things work. So what it told me, I basically asked, explain why annuities are profitable for insurance companies, but sometimes bad for consumers. And what it told me was high fees and charges. It says insurance companies typically load annuities with fees, admin fees, mortality and expense charges, fund management fees, surrender charges, etc. And I'm assuming that surrender charge is saying, like, if you withdraw something earlier than you're supposed to, or you want to cancel the thing, there's going to be some sort of fat fee, I'm sure, for that.
And Kevin, also, it's why it's very important, regardless of whether you can do anything about it or not, your bills that you get, check those charges out. Everything that shows up is itemized on a lot of bills that you get. These little 50 cent here or dollar charge here doesn't sound like a lot, and to the average person, it's honestly not. If I have an extra dollar charge on my bill, it's probably not going to raise my eyebrows. However, when you do this, or when you have that kind of thing happen with a big company, they have millions of customers. You're talking about millions of dollars they've made just by adding another dollar charge here, dollar charge there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another thing that they do, and as a matter of fact, my understanding is they do this more effectively than even banks do, because I either heard or read Buffett. There's a lot of videos of Warren Buffett talking about insurance companies, and I'm sure there's been plenty of articles too, but somewhere along the lines in one of those videos or articles that I saw, he mentioned that he eventually figured out that insurance is a much better business than even banking, because unlike banks having to keep a bunch of money on hand to give people for withdrawals, insurance companies, they typically don't have to give you back anything, is what he was getting at, which means that when you give them money and they don't necessarily owe you something back, they just turn around like the bank does and invest it into other things. And even if they do pay you, let's say you get a 4% in your annuity, they're going to be earning typically a minimum of double of that. Like here it says they're earning 6 to 7%, but I can assure you that's on the low end. I know that they can earn.
And you just look at something like life insurance. And again, I'm not bashing life insurance. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to have for your family. However, the average person is doing everything they can to stay alive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you get an insurance policy when you're 30, a life insurance policy, and you live to be 80. You've paid a premium every month for 50 years. And life insurance people, they're doing good.
Mm-hmm. No, I want to say that life insurance is the single most profitable niche within insurance. A lot of either retired people or people that are no longer working as much as they once were, senior citizens and whatnot, a lot of them end up going back and selling life insurance because if you're good at it, you can definitely make a lot of money. And as I've stated before, it's advertised as security for you, but the primary reason is always profit for the company, and it's just something you have to keep in your mind. And
Also,
remember.
something that I would just learned about recently. I've lived on this earth over 50 years and didn't know that insurance companies have insurance.
Yeah.
They have insurance on their claims.
Yeah, insurance on top of insurance sounds like a scheme.
Now that sounds like a business that would be cool to get into, selling insurance to insurance companies.
Yeah, I'd have a field day with that. They've been lying to themselves so long that they convince themselves that they need insurance for their insurance.
Well, you got to know what you're doing. They know all your tricks. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and here we've got another point on this Chat GPT summary where it says risk pooling is what it calls it. And it says some annuities are built on the idea that not everyone will live long enough to collect everything they're owed. And it says some, but I can assure you the right word for that would be most.
Yes.
Most annuities are built on the idea that not everyone will live long enough or be able to collect what they are owed. And so therefore this leftover money helps pay others and boost profits.
And be aware, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but not all retirement plans, not all companies are the same. Sometimes, if you go to work for a good company, sometimes your family can continue to collect your benefits, whereas others they can't.
Yeah, no, and if you can set something up like that and get it to actually pay out, then yeah, of course that's a good thing that you have going there. But the key is like making sure that if you do get one, that you get one that without a doubt is not gonna not pay out. Because if you're getting it for security purposes or for your family to have when you pass away, then it completely defeats the purpose if you can't depend on them to meet their obligation.
That's right.
And then another point that Chat GPT was making was long-term contracts and low liquidity. So typically once you buy one of these things, it says it's tough to get your money out, which gives insurance companies a lot of stability and time to reinvest your money and earn proceeds from that.
And also, Kevin, one thing that I mentioned while we're here talking about these insurance policies, and the only reason I bring it up is because I've heard several stories, more than one, of family members not knowing that a loved one had a life insurance policy. And in some cases, it was never paid. Sometimes it was years before it was paid out because family members didn't know they had one, so there was never a claim filed. So those kind of things are, extremely. You need to stay on top of that. At least let some loved one know.
Yeah, that's true. Unless it's one that wants to kill you, we've all heard horror stories and rumors of, or people joking around about, man, they'd sure like to, knock somebody off and collect the collect the money. But
Which sounds like the plot to several movies, but
Yeah.
only because it's true. It's happened before.
oh yeah, I'm sure it's happened more than we would probably care to know. Um, let's see. Another point that ChatGPT makes is people often buy add-ons like guaranteed income or death benefits, which come at a steep cost and often go unused or underutilized. So I know that, like, let's take fitness gyms, or where you go to lift weights and do cardio.
Which I hadn't
Part,
been in a long time.
yeah, I need to do a better job. Me and Ryan, I guess, both have been slacking a little as of late. I'm trying to get back into it. But anyway, what I was getting at with the gym thing is that part of their business model is counting on not everybody to show up. So I know that's especially true for old, let's just call them PF. I know, the gyms that are all over the country are the ones that have a whole lot of locations. Part of what they're hoping is that people are going to pay their gym bill and not show up.
Which is the reason that they're willing to take a cut if you allow them to do a bank draft. So you don't have to remember to pay them.
Yeah. Yep. No, getting you on auto pay is always ideal for companies. They want to create as much separation as they can from you being able to feel any kind of emotion from losing money. They want it to be a smooth, easy transition, That way you don't.
That's right. Sign up for the huge membership and don't ever come and forget you signed up.
Yeah. Yep, that's the idea. Unfortunately. I just skipped way down here. There's another section in here on why annuities can be bad for customers, and it lists complexity and lack of transparency. So it says annuities are notoriously confusing with dense contracts and vague terms. Most buyers don't fully understand what they're getting. And again, it talks about high fees, reduced long-term returns compared to traditional investment options like index funds. So basically what I want you to get out of all this is you're going to hear me talk about, obviously it's an investing podcast, so investing in stocks and real estate. And basically the reason why I emphasize the importance of doing that and taking a little bit of risk is if you don't take the risk, somebody else is just going to turn around, take your money, and do what you should have done with it in the first place. That's how banks and insurance companies operate. Is they're like, okay, well, old Kevin here is satisfied with his little 4% return, so let's keep giving him 4% and making 10% ourselves, or 15% or 20%, and that's. I just need you to know that that's what we should be doing ourselves. And your families, I'm sure you would agree with me on this, deserve that money. Probably more so than banks and insurance companies and so on. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all these businesses should be out of business, but I'm just saying you need to fully understand the whole process so that you're not, piling liabilities onto yourself as opposed to assets. Let's see. I briefly mentioned that Warren Buffett that he started realizing that insurance companies were a good investment. And not only did he realize that they were better potentially than regular banking, he even felt that they were potentially better than investment banking, because big hedge funds and big investment institutions, a lot of the time, even though they have ways where they can lock up your money for a little bit, for the most part, if an investor asks for his cash back, typically they have to find a way to give it back to you. And so the reason insurance companies are such an attractive investment is because they typically have a lot of ways where they can refuse to give it back to you potentially. So, because like I spoke about at the beginning of the podcast, I had to hire a separate guy just to fight him for, somewhere around a year to get to where we needed to be. And another reason I bring up Buffett, I wanted to just sort of try to summarize how he got to where he is. And I'm not saying you want to aspire to be a billionaire, but I mean, there's good lessons in there on how to grow your own wealth potentially. I want to say Buffett started off, I almost want to say he filed a tax return for the first time when he was like 13 years old.
That's
So,
right.
have any of you guys filed taxes still as a kid? I don't think I ever did.
That's a negative.
Not unless it was required.
Yeah, so that tells you right off the bat that he was different. I guess in a good way somewhat, but so I know he delivered papers at one point. I was watching this video reminding me of the steps that he took. He delivered papers, and I want to say it was somewhere between 1935 and 1940. Those paper routes per route would pay him something like $175, which in today's money doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to remember that over time, the time value of money and inflation wear down the value of cash. So back then, $175 was probably more like, I don't know, $2,000 or, but anyway, he started making a decent chunk of money doing paper routes. And I want to say soon after that, he started noticing that kids were playing pinball a lot. And he said, hey, I ought to consider buying some of these pinball machines. And so, obviously I'm summarizing a lot here, but he started slowly accumulating some pinball machines and convincing store owners to let him utilize space in their business for those pinball machines. And I want to say from there, once he built up, I don't even know how many thousands of dollars, $10,000 maybe, he went, no, it was less than that. It was like $2,500 he took and parked into, and you're really going to think this is crazy. With $2,500, he bought 40 acres and a farm. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do that today?
God.
Yes.
And can one of y'all check for me and see what $2,500 would be worth in today's money in like 1935? I'll see if I can find it too.
In what year?
Let's say 1935. Yeah. Well, let's try 1935. To me, it looks like it was something like $47,246.
My calculator says 58,000, but
Jeez.
I'll take mine.
Yeah.
Mine says 55.
So either way, somewhere between $47,000 and $55,000 is what $2,500 would have been, that's wild. That's pretty crazy to think that. I don't know what age he was by the time he accumulated that $2,500, but I know it was before he was college age or before he was out of grade school. So imagine already having 50 grand before you're ever even out of high school.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good head start, in my opinion.
Now their kids are millionaires.
Yeah. Nowadays, I mean, if you have a kid that knows YouTube or TikTok or Facebook Reels,
He
and
was born in 1930.
1930, Buffett was born in 30.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and he's spoken about this in videos himself before, where he was very fortunate to grow up when he did, but that's not to take away that he had some obvious talent for finding deals. I mean, yeah, he grew up in a time where, you could argue that prices were a whole lot cheaper, but you also have to keep in mind that people from this time period had struggles that we no longer have today. Like,
Well, he was born during the Depression.
yeah, yeah. So he definitely went through the Great Depression. And then also, this generation didn't have obviously the internet and computers like we do today. So for him to achieve this without the internet or computers, he had to be exceedingly smart, for one thing, to be able to figure out how to, become an entrepreneur, because there just wasn't the amount of help that there is today.
Regardless of what your story is, a person who was born during the Depression and is now a billionaire, there was some very blessed success there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm not saying that this is the reason for his success, but just to let you know, I'm not trying to hide anything. I want to say his dad, I don't remember if he was an attorney or what, but his dad had a good job and at one point served in either Congress or the Senate. But even though that was the case, I don't think his dad, from my understanding, ever really gave him any money. I think he pretty much made everything on his own. And I want to say by the time he went to college, he came across a book called The Intelligent Investor. And I don't have any advertising deals right now. So if you go out and buy that book, it's not going to benefit me any. But he says he used, and the author's name was Benjamin Graham. He claims that is still probably the best book that he's ever read on what helped him change his mindset to be a better investor. And I want to say, I haven't read the book myself, but I know that Warren is typically described as a value investor, which basically means that he was trying to find cheap stocks that would, obviously the share price would go up a lot. So he would try to find companies that he felt were undervalued, buy into them, and then, obviously sell them, hopefully at a much later date at a much higher price. And he's also been known to say that smaller amounts of capital, it's easier to make higher returns with. So he said when you're working with a small amount of money, it's much easier potentially to make as much as a 50% return than it is when you're managing millions and or billions of dollars in capital. And a lot of people might go, well, like, he's got to be lying, right? Because the more money that you have, the more that you're going to make. But when you factor in compounding and just how long it takes for something to double, he's actually correct. Because let's just use a simple example. If I have a company that's worth $10 million and within time it becomes worth $20 million, so that would have theoretically doubled my investment. But if you invest in, let's say, something like Microsoft or Apple that's already worth a couple $1 trillion, well, in order to double your money, that company will have to go from, let's say, $2 trillion to $4 trillion. And that, no matter how good the company is, it's always going to be much more difficult to go from such a high number to another even higher number. And then something else that people don't think about is these large companies, once they get that big, typically they have to worry about the government stepping in and breaking them up for being a monopoly. Or it hasn't happened, or it doesn't feel like it's happened as much recently as it has in past decades, but it's starting to feel like the government's starting to crack down a little bit more on super large companies again. But anyway, that's a risk that a lot of people don't consider, is that, just once you get so big, I mean, yeah, it's you do have more sources for defense, like attorneys and that sort of thing, but it's just basic math. It's easier to go from $1 to $2 than it is to go from $100 to $200. It just comes down to simple math and compounding. Anyway, though, back to Buffett. I want to say after he made some money from that farm, He sold that farm, and then, or maybe even before that, he bought. I think the first stock he ever bought was something called City Services Preferred. And he made, or at first he bought it and then it lost value. And then at one point it popped back up like 5% and he sold it and gave the profit to his sister. I think he was doing it to help his sister. But then soon after, he sold it too early. I want to say soon after it jumped like another 25 or 30%. And that really upset him because it cost him about $400 or something like that, which again, in money back then, that would have been thousands of dollars. In today's money.
By the way, his father was a part owner of an investment brokerage firm and was a 4-term member of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Okay. Well, his father was a little more well off than I thought he was then. I didn't know he had 4 terms. And you said he was also, he had his own asset management group. Is that what you said?
It was called Buffett, Falk and Company.
Yeah, I definitely didn't know that. That's interesting to know. Well, maybe he did have a even more of an advantage than I thought he did starting out. But, so yeah, don't get me wrong, guys. Circumstances definitely help and matter, but also at the same time, we can't allow ourselves to, if we don't come from as good of circumstances, we can't let that be an excuse to not, go out and hustle and try to be better and make the lives of your families better. You just, that victim mentality you'll suffer over the long term if you have that mentality.
In 1942, in his first term as a representative, the salary for a U.S. representative was $10,000 a year.
10,000 a year. It's a whole lot lower than it is now, I'm sure.
That's correct.
I'm sure I want to say they start off now somewhere between 125 and 150,000. But that's, and the other thing is salary to them is nothing because, I mean, you're talking about getting kickbacks and lobbying funds from who knows how many different organizations. So it's always much more lucrative than that salary number. That salary number ain't nothing to them. Otherwise, it wouldn't be such big business, and they wouldn't spend so much money trying to get elected. There's, did y'all ever watch the show House of Cards? Back
No,
in
sir.
the day? Well, anyway, I want to say it starred Kevin Spacey, and he may be in jail now, but I know he got in trouble for something. But anyway, he was in this show, I believe, called House of Cards, where he was basically a congressman from the South, and he worked his way all the way into the White House. Now, mind you, this is a fictional show, but one of his, I think, famous quotes from the show was he said somebody made the mistake of choosing money over power. And he said the thing about choosing power is you have no tax bracket. And as scummy as that sounds, he's not entirely wrong, unfortunately. At least the way that politics is now, he's not wrong because, I mean, they can potentially gain a ridiculous amount of money from so many different sources.
And as of 2020, it still is today, the salary for a U.S. representative or a senator is $174,000.
Oh man, and that's like an appetizer for them. That's crazy. Yeah, it's definitely lucrative, much more lucrative than it appears at first glance. That's for sure. And then I think that mostly describes the early stages of Buffett. I mean, obviously later on he built his own hedge fund. Yeah, I think that was what happened next. Was he started a hedge fund and became pretty successful doing that, and he managed some of the money for some of his own family members, and then he at some point bought into an insurance company. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but ultimately he ended up purchasing, I want to say Geico. Like I think today Berkshire Hathaway owns Geico. So insurance, I think he's even been quoted as saying that insurance is the best business that he's ever invested in. And as we were having that discussion earlier, you can see why now, because you know you're able to collect money from sometimes a non-existent product. So basically pulling money out of thin air sometimes. But yeah, it's almost like, another thing that businesses joke around about is they want to be able to print money. Um, and that I've spoken about this book before. There's a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and he asks Robert Kiyosaki when he's a young kid something about what would be the best thing to do if you could, and it led to some sort of discussion about, well, why not just print the money yourself? And so businesses have this idea of the closer I can get to printing my own money, um, the better off I'm going to be. And again, sounds like you're doing something illegal. And if you bought a machine to actually print money, you would be doing something illegal. But what they try to do is stay within the lines of the law, but get as close to the line as they can without doing something illegal.
There's some very interesting sub companies of Berkshire Hathaway here. One of them that you wouldn't think about is Clayton Homes, a mobile home manufacturer.
Oh, I bet that's super lucrative too.
Pilot Travel Centers is owned by Berkshire Hathaway.
Wait, what was that one
The
again?
Pilot Travel Centers, they're like a Love's,
Oh, okay, like a gas,
like a truck
big
stop.
truck stop.
They own
Yeah.
that. They own Benjamin Moore Paint.
Golly. Yeah, and those are just a few. I know there's a lot more than that.
And that's not even mentioning, I'm looking at about 8 or 9 insurance companies here. One of them is a business insurance company.
Yeah, dang. They own 8 or 9 separate insurance companies. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Jeez. I know they have or I'm pretty sure they have a real estate company too. I think they sell homes too. But yeah, Berkshire Hathaway. And as a matter of fact, since we're talking about it, I got to pull up the chart. Let's see.
They own Shaw Industries, which is a flooring company, which makes different types of flooring.
Dang.
They're
Yeah.
monopolizing.
Yeah. Berkshire Hathaway, as of close of today, is worth $1.14 trillion.
And they own Dairy Queen.
Yeah, that's another thing. I think there's some videos where he talks about how he got into Dairy Queen, and I don't know from a performance standpoint how well Dairy Queen's been for him, but I know that he loves Coke and he loves ice cream, so he knew he wanted to invest in Coca-Cola and Dairy Queen, and I think they've both done pretty well for him.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
He owns Duracell.
So a battery company too.
Owns Forest River, which is a travel trailer company.
Yeah. And the reason why I chose Buffett to talk about as opposed to the numerous other billionaires is, and I'm not bashing him, he's a smart man, and that's kind of the point I'm making, is a lot of billionaires become billionaires because they come up with some new product or service that the world didn't have before. But Buffett
Or they're good at buying the companies that they know make money.
yeah, well, I was gonna say, but Buffett saw his rise because he is just good at recognizing what good potential investments are. So he didn't come up with a new product or service. He just had a good eye for opportunities, is basically what led him to, become as wealthy as he has.
And even though he's been very, very successful. He can probably tell you all the ones that he passed on that he wished that he didn't.
Oh yeah, he's spent a lot of time on there's, and I encourage you to go look up some YouTube's or YouTube videos of him talking because you'll learn a lot. But and when I was learning how to do all this myself, I spent who knows how many hours watching videos of him speak at shareholder meetings and conferences, and at one point or more than one point throughout a lot of those videos, he's always talking about how, yeah, you see how well I've done, but think if I would have bought into Amazon or Apple, or no matter how good you become at this, like I've said before, I have 30,000 hours of investment experience, active investment experience, and that does not mean that I can always spot what the next big thing is going to be. You'll have services and people out here claiming that they can give you the next big stock, and that's, no matter how experienced you are, you can never be absolutely sure that something is going to be the next Apple, because 20 years from now, nobody nobody can accurately predict the future. So you can never say for sure that some company is going to be still be in business, 20 years from now. But even with that being said, you do still want to plan for 10 to 20 years out. I mean, obviously the goal is to invest in things that are still going to be around 20 years from now. So, but all you can ultimately do is just make your best educated guess.
By the way, I don't know if they're all listed here, but on this one website where I am, I'm counting 67 companies that Berkshire Hathaway owns.
67.
That's right.
Yeah, sounds about right. Because, oh, and another thing for those of you listening, I can see it up here on screen, but so a lot of different companies have different classes of stock. Like, for instance, Berkshire Hathaway has at least BRKA and BRKB Class A shares and Class B shares. And I may have mentioned this before, but Berkshire Hathaway is worth, at least Class A shares, $792,000, 500 a share. So if you have $792,000, you can buy one share of BRKA.
And they will let you.
Yeah. They'll definitely let you. And yeah, it sounds crazy, but I mean, when you're talking about a company that's worth $1.14 trillion, yeah.
By the way, Hellsberg Diamonds they own.
That would make sense. I don't know a ton about the diamond industry, but from what I've heard and read, part of the reason why diamonds are so lucrative is because a small amount of people control the mines, and they also control the supply that's released onto the market.
And let's be honest, let's think about it. You're selling very expensive rocks to people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely lucrative, obviously, because somehow they've managed to convince all of society that you can't get married unless you get a fat diamond for,
right.
for somebody. It's not a wedding unless there's a big old diamond. Yeah.
See, and on top of that, underneath that diamond, you got to have gold too. So
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I don't know if it was De Beers or who, but one of the major diamond companies, I don't know how they convinced all of society that that was a necessity, but obviously they did a really good job of that. Yeah. And that's what the best businesses do. They convince people that they need something that they didn't used to need, but now all of a sudden they do. And I mean, in some cases, don't get me wrong, in some cases we pretty much do get to where we need certain things like electricity and utilities and that sort of thing, but we also tend to sometimes confuse needs and wants, and sometimes something that we think we need is really just a want and something we can do without. But I think that pretty much describes Buffett. Let's see. I guess we can sort of move into current events and then biblical stuff. As far as I can tell, news this week is just they're still talking about tariffs, and I saw some sort of story about the Iran nuclear deal, which I don't even know how long that's been going on now. I know that we're trying to or we've been trying to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon. So I think they're trying to come up with a way that Iran can have a nuclear energy program for utility purposes, but you know, they're trying to avoid them getting an actual nuclear weapon. Anybody heard anything about that or?
I mean, I've seen some federal workforce reductions that Paul Trump's administration has initiated a bunch of layoffs across multiple federal agencies.
Yeah, I know that's definitely been an ongoing thing. Does it list any specifics?
I mean, they were talking about the EPA, CDC, and IRS people.
EPA, so Environmental Protection Agency. Did you say CPC?
CDC.
CDC, so Disease Control.
And the IRS.
And then IRS.
Yeah.
IRS to me makes, and don't get me wrong, I'm a very experienced investor, but as far as an economist, economy is a much broader topic. So, but what I was getting at was saying that is that to me, it seems like maybe making some cuts in the IRS probably isn't a bad idea, but
yeah,
CPA and CPA, EPA, yeah, EPA. I don't know. You know, I know that there are a lot of people that have their opinions about the environment, and I'm not saying I'm not the type of person that believes that I don't know that we're gonna see the world flood again or something, but I definitely
that will not happen again.
Yeah, yeah. I think the Bible tells us that the world won't end again in that manner, but I
there's a bow in the sky after the rain, so there's a promise there.
Yeah, but I do believe that we could always be better stewards of our planet.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know that I love the idea of making cuts there, but I mean, I understand why they feel that that would be beneficial because they want oil companies to be able to drill more than they have been under recent administrations. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I want to say that that's the reason why the Gulf of Mexico was changed to the Gulf of America is because Biden's administration somehow got into legislation or something that you can't drill in the Gulf of Mexico. And so, you know, lawyers and other business minds said, hey, how can we make a loophole from that? Oh, we just rename the Gulf.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was the reason for that.
In fact, we're never going to be drilling in the Gulf of Mexico again.
Yeah. Yep. They will honor that. They will never drill in the Gulf of Mexico again because it no longer exists. It's definitely some straight up lawyer stuff for sure. And that just goes to show you how all sorts of business transactions and investments end up happening is because smart people pay some smart lawyer to come up with a loophole. And even though we spoke the other day, me and Chris, about how Pharisees and lawyers used to pretty much be interchangeable. Even though the message in the Bible was for the Pharisees at the time, thousands of years ago, it still applies today. At least from what I see, it still applies to our modern day too.
Oh yeah.
And then let's see. Ryan, I'm sure those of you listening have heard something recently about this pastor named Marvin Sapp. I don't know a lot about him personally. I just remember one day I started seeing a lot of memes and videos about so this guy apparently, and let me say this before we start talking about this. You absolutely should tithe to a church. Tithing is good, and pastors and other staff, the only way that they're going to typically be able to receive pay for all that they do is, from my understanding, from those tithes. Not that that's the only reason for the tithe. They also go to other charitable causes and to help other churches as well. But anyway, my understanding is Marvin Sapp became quickly much more famous because he
I think that was his goal.
yeah, it could have been. He could have done that just for because he knew he'd gain a lot of notoriety. But says one of the headlines says gospel star Marvin Sapp responds to criticism over donation requests, order to close doors. So I think what he did was, and I think I think somebody recorded it on video, but he closed the doors and told everybody to give either 20 or $40. And it was something like, what do we say, 20,000 people?
No, it was 1,000 attendance and then 1,000 online, and he was asking for $20 a piece.
Yeah, that's right. 1,000 in physical location and 1,000 online. And so if they gave in to his request, it would have generated something like what, $40,000?
Yeah.
He's trying to raise 40,000.
Yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong, asking for 20 or $40 for most people, at least in the United States, that's not a huge chunk to give. It's just that you can't actually lock in your congregation and say, do this or you can't leave.
Yeah.
Well, word is he could be facing some legal trouble over that.
Yeah. So
Kidnap 1,000 people.
some serious extortion there. But
Next year's book, the Guinness World Records, he's going to be in there.
yeah. And I mean, look, even though this is funny and easy to pick on and joke about, as a lot of people have, I'm including myself in this. All of us as followers of Christ, and especially church leadership, we have to start doing a better job of, more closely following biblical principles ourselves. Because anytime something like this happens, unfortunately, it draws people away from Christ. Because we've spoken about this before. Humans are always making errors because we're imperfect and sinful. But even though we're imperfect and sinful, we still need to do the best that we can so that we don't draw people away from Christ, as opposed to bring them in. So yeah, that's.
I mean, it's kind of like the Pharisees Jesus was talking about in Luke 11. They were too worried about themselves and not others. They were self-centered instead of others-centered.
Yeah, and speaking of which, let me try to pull. Where were we? Luke 11 let me try verse 30. Luke 11
37.
37.
And not to place a burden on one person without spreading it around like that. But Marvin Sapp is a former gospel singer. He has a net worth of $4 million. $40,000 is 1% of $4 million.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So there you go. And that's another reason too. And yeah, I'm not trying to just pick on mega churches exclusively, but I will say, I wish more people would give smaller churches a chance because, they can benefit, or they need those tithing dollars much more so than organizations that are already very large.
Be very discerning where you send your money.
Yeah. Yeah. All goes back to good stewardship. Um, and this brings us back to scripture. The other day we started off on the part talking about lawyers, but if we go to Luke 11:37, and like I said, even though he was speaking to the Pharisees back then, this also applies to all of church leadership today. He says, and as he spoke, a certain Pharisee, and this is talking about Jesus, I believe, right, Chris?
Yes.
Uh, and as he spoke, a certain Pharisee asked him to dine with him. So he went and sat down to eat. When the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. Then the Lord said to him, now you Pharisees make the outside of the cup and dish clean, but your inward part is full of greed and wickedness. Foolish ones, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But rather give alms of such things as you have, then indeed all things are clean to you. But woe to you Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass by justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Woe to you Pharisees, for you love the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. Woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like graves which are not seen, and the men who walk over them are not aware of them. And then one of the lawyers answered and said to him, Teacher, by saying these things, you reproach us also. And I'm sure at that point Jesus rolled his eyes and said, yeah, that's my entire point. I'm chewing you out. Yes, I am talking to you. And yes, this is conviction, and that's when we're new to following Jesus and we're not used to conviction, at least in my experience. And even once you are a more experienced follower, sometimes conviction is unpleasant, but we just have to be able to recognize that it's a necessary thing since we're imperfect to be convicted sometimes, and so that we can enable ourselves to repent and turn towards Christ. But yeah, anybody got any thoughts on that?
I think it's hilarious that Jesus intentionally didn't wash just so that he could say something. I think it was intentional. Lord, was it intentional?
And also, they were talking to Jesus, telling him to be careful, because apparently they thought they were above reproach.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. That's, I think that's, I know Chris told us one time that, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, you said hypocrisy in ancient Greek meant actors or play actors.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure in this instance, God is, or at least Jesus is talking about exactly what we think he's talking about, which is he's saying don't act one way and do another thing, or don't expect something of people that you aren't willing to do yourself,
Which was a hallmark of the leadership, even in his day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure when Jesus came around and started preaching stuff like this, everybody was scratching their heads in those days.
Which ultimately was the reason he was crucified.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got to get rid of this guy. He's making us look bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's out to destroy us is probably what they were thinking. And we all know once people get powerful, they are willing to do a lot of things to get rid of threats. And yeah, this just goes to show you that.
Well, back in his day, that was the politics of the day. I mean, you can imagine today what would happen if the things that you were saying were going to get our elected officials thrown out. What kind of reaction would there be?
Oh, it would be drastic and swift.
Amen.
And I'm trying to think of what a recent example of that was. Oh, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm defending this, but we all remember recently, what was it, 2020, the Capitol event?
Worst day in American history.
Yeah, the insurrection. Um, yeah, because, and don't get me wrong, like I said, I'm not saying it was right, but because the reason so much blowback, in my opinion, came from that wasn't because of what people were doing per se, but it was because all those politicians thought that they might get hurt or die, you know?
That's right.
So they perceive something as a threat potentially to their life and their family. And that's why that, in my opinion, became such a huge ordeal.
Well,
is
it's the reason
because-
that Musk and Doge are getting so much pushback right now.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
afraid
you-
they might find out where the money's going.
Yeah. And I think part of the scripture from the other day too said that, like, you know, you place burdens on others that you wouldn't place on yourself.
That's
And
right.
to me, that applies to that situation right there. It's, oh, now that you're attacking us, it's a problem all of a sudden. You know,
That's right.
I'm not worried about what happens to others, but once it happens to me, now it's a problem.
Yeah.
So that, but that seems like a pretty, I guess, a pretty good spot to maybe. Ryan, what are we running now time wise?
Hour and 15.
Hour and 15. All right. Well, yeah, that sounds like a good place to finish up. Anybody else got any final comments?
No, sir.
Do
All
good.
right.
Put God first.
Yes.
Yep. Do good things and put God first. And we'll see you guys back for the next episode. Take care, guys.